Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Dose. And after 20 wild months of back and forth and back, we've been here every step of the way together. But it appears the Microsoft Activision Blizzard saga is finally, yes, finally, almost over. It's hard to believe, but we are coming to an end. Huge, massive news broke today as the CMA posted their provisional decision, and we will talk all about that today and then what will happen next. Also, speaking of acquisitions, Xbox as well as some other publishers, maybe Sony, but somebody might have another chance to pick up some pretty major studios because Embracer Group might be looking around to see if they can offload some of their long list of studios. As always, though, we do have a lot to get into today, so let's just go and jump right into things, starting off with the Steam Deck. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard somebody say they're going to wait until the Steam Deck 2 hits the market before jumping into the PC gaming handheld side of things. I mean, honestly, I think that is a wise decision. I have no problem with that just because it does give this technology a chance to mature further. And surely, the next generation will improve on things like its battery life and screen. Now, at the same time, though, I'll tell you this right now. I love my Steam Deck. I also like the ROG Ally as well. I use that for my Game Pass games. Both of them are fantastic handheld devices. So I really don't think that there's a wrong decision here. It just kind of depends on each individual person if they want to wait or get one now. But the reason I tell you all this is because those who are waiting, it sounds like you'll be waiting for, unfortunately, a long time. Valve, in an interview, suggested that the Steam Deck 2 is still years away due to the technology available to them. This is what they said. Right now, we're kind of looking at this performance target that we have as a stable target for a couple years. We think that it's a pretty sweet spot in terms of being able to play all the experiences from this new generation, and so far, the new releases are coming out with great experiences on Steam Deck. We also don't want more performance to come at a significant cost of power efficiency and battery life. I don't anticipate such a leap to be possible in the next couple of years, but we're still closely monitoring innovations in architectures and fabrication processes to see where things are going there. So based on the wordage here, I wouldn't go in expecting a new Steam Deck at least for another couple years. We're probably looking at around 2026 at the earliest before we hear about the Steam Deck 2, but it really all just kind of depends on how fast technology advances. So if you don't want to wait that long, again, I do think that these are great devices. I would highly recommend them, but like I said before, it just kind of depends on each individual person. Now, we did also get an update for the Metal Gear Solid Collection Volume 1. If you remember right, a couple months back, there was some controversy surrounding its performance on the Nintendo Switch. There was some concern about its frame rate and resolution, and yeah, about that. Konami did post a performance chart today, and surprisingly, the performance concerns are no longer just linked to the Nintendo Switch. Yeah, so you can check it out here, but 1080p at 30 frames per second is a very real thing on the Xbox Series, the PlayStation 5, and PC as well. Now, this is just for Metal Gear Solid 1. Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 do hit that 60 frames target that we want, but again, as you're seeing, it's only 1080p resolution. The Switch versions, however, are all set at 30 frames per second, though you do get 1080p in TV mode, while handheld mode is set at 720p. So, yeah, with that, I'm already seeing a lot of disappointment with this announcement, especially with that 30 frames per second. I do kind of wonder if maybe Metal Gear Solid 1's frame rate is locked to its animations or something like that, and maybe that's why they can't bump it up. I'm just trying to make sense of this because it doesn't really make a lot of sense that a game as old as this can't hit 60 frames. So there has to be an explanation here. Either way, though, to see these games not reach 4K resolution either in the year of 2023, yeah, it's not really a great look. Even still, with all of that, these are still amazing games, and I know for somebody like myself, I do want to own these games on modern platforms, so I'll still get these games and everything, but what I'm kind of hoping to see here is that the eventual Volume 2, which will likely include Metal Gear Solid 4, that's the one I am crossing my fingers for, that's the one I really want, hopefully that specific game will be 4K 60 frames per second. Until then, something I just kind of keep an eye on is the PC version. I wouldn't be all that surprised if the modding community works on these games and maybe bumps them up to 4K resolution, but even then, we'll see how all that plays out. All right, so let's just go and jump into the big breaking story of the day. I know, this has been a crazy, wild ride from beginning to end, but that right there is the thing. We are officially in the end game. I'm going to go and say that one more time. We are officially in the end game, finally. The CMA just announced that they've provisionally approved the Microsoft Activision Blizzard buyout. Now, that is a huge, huge step in completing this acquisition. Though before we go any further, it's still not completely over. I'd love to say that, but it's not. The big news here is that it ultimately appears that it will get accepted before the October 18th deadline, but there are a few things that the CMA and Microsoft still needs to clear up. We'll get into that here in just a second, but this is the CMA's reasoning on why they gave their provisional approval for the buyout. They said the sale of Activision's cloud gaming rights to Ubisoft substantially addresses previous concerns and opens the door to the deal being cleared. This, of course, is referring to Microsoft selling off the Activision Blizzard cloud rights to Ubisoft. That is something that they announced not that long ago. Keep in mind that that's only for the cloud. This does not affect Microsoft's control of native releases on Xbox, PC, and Xbox Game Pass. Microsoft will still have full reign over all of that. So, truthfully, I don't really think them giving up cloud rights is that big of a deal, considering cloud game streaming makes up less than 1% of gaming. I mean, for that matter, according to Phil Spencer, their investment in cloud gaming for this year is next to zero. This was a part of the FTC leak that happened earlier this week, and Phil went so far as to say that he believes their way forward in mobile gaming is with native releases and not with cloud game streaming. So it was always baffling that the CMA tried to hold up this acquisition because of cloud gaming, out of all things. I feel like this is such a huge oversight by them. It's always been ridiculous. Cloud gaming, and I've said this 100 times, it's just a big mystery right now. There's no guarantee for success, and if anything, it looks shaky right now. But by Microsoft giving up their control for cloud gaming, or at least with Activision Blizzard, this appears to have gone a long way in fixing any issue that the CMA previously had. Like I said before, though, despite what people are saying online, this is still not a 100% guarantee approval. So you still do need to buckle up in case there's any other unexpected surprises. Now, I'm not saying that I expect a surprise. I don't. I'd say this is about as good as done by this point. But I also understand that this buyout has had one unexpected turn after another. So I'm just saying, I would just never tell you all that is a 100% guarantee until we get it across the finish line. That's all I'm trying to say here. But the CMA did go on to say, while the CMA has identified limited residual concerns with this new deal, Microsoft has put forward remedies which the CMA has provisionally concluded should address these issues. The CMA is now consulting on the remedies before making a final decision. So that's what's happening right now. Microsoft and the CMA are currently working together to fix up any small residual issues that they might have. This kind of boils down to the CMA making sure that there's no loopholes for Microsoft to work with. They want to make sure Ubisoft can't grant Microsoft any exclusive licenses. They don't want Ubisoft to give them preferential treatment. Microsoft has to offer Ubisoft games at no higher than retail prices. Microsoft also has to offer technical support for Ubisoft Activision Blizzard cloud games. There's some parity clauses here to make sure Ubisoft gets the same content as the native versions. They also can't exclude non-Windows machines if Ubisoft wants to expand. And lastly, there will be a monitoring trustee to oversee the party's compliance with the proposed undertakings if required by the CMA. So knowing all of that, none of this seems to be anything too major. I don't foresee any big problems with these requests. Microsoft and the CMA should likely come to a full agreement within the next couple weeks. And that right now is why the CMA provisionally approved the deal, because by all means, they themselves don't foresee having a problem going forward. I mean, if anything, this might not necessarily be a 100% guarantee, and I keep emphasizing that, but it, however, is about as close as you can get to that. By all indications, as of today, September 22nd, Microsoft will close this buyout this October, and that will be that. As we officially move into the end game, though, just kind of remember, I always stayed confident in this acquisition. If you all have been following me for a while, a lot of people on these platforms, Twitter, YouTube, or whatever, they flip-flopped all over the place. But I came in here time and time again, and I always told you all, it's not over. And this here is exactly why. I don't just jump onto some bandwagon. I do look at the overall picture, and I try to tell you all as honestly as I can why I feel the way I feel. And I've always felt confident in this because I always felt like that there was a way Microsoft could work around it. And that's exactly why we are where we are today, because Microsoft figured things out. Now, it might have taken a little bit longer than predicted, but Activision Blizzard likely will be under Microsoft's control outside of cloud gaming within the next month. And I mean, if you just think about that for a moment, Microsoft had like 7 studios last generation on the Xbox One. I'm not even sure if they had 7, but there was some very real discussions if Xbox had a future in the game industry. There was talk about them closing down, and then Phil Spencer and Satya Nadella, they sat down, and the rest is history. Xbox will most likely soon own 30 plus studios and will have countless IP under the Xbox umbrella, including the usual Gears, Halo, Forza, and Fable. Those are the OG Xbox franchises, but then they have all these new studios with games like Minecraft, Hellblade, Psychonauts, The Outer Worlds, Pillars of Eternity, Wasteland. They have a ton of rare IP like Killer Instinct, Perfect Dark, Battletoads, Banjo-Kazooie. The list goes on and on. Then they have Bethesda with games like Hi-Fi Rush. They have Starfield, which just released to a ton of success. They have The Elder Scrolls, Doom, Fallout, The Evil Within, Ghostwire Tokyo, and now soon they might have Activision Blizzard games on top of all that, with games like Overwatch, Diablo, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, World of Warcraft, StarCraft, and of course, the big behemoth that caused just so much ruckus throughout this entire saga, Call of Duty. It is actually crazy just how far Xbox has come in the last 7 or so years, and all of these games, plus plenty more that I didn't name, will be bound to Xbox Game Pass going forward. Let's not kid ourselves here. This is a game-changing acquisition for Xbox, and this really could cement them as a major player for the next decade plus, with so many IP and studios under their belt. I mean, of course, we still have to wait and see what happens over the next month, but as always, stay tuned, stay subscribed, because as always, I will update you all as soon as we learn more. Now, there is another story here, though, regarding acquisitions, and I actually have a sneaky suspicion that Xbox might also get involved in this. Now, I'll get into the reason as to why in just a moment, though to be clear, I could also see Sony get involved. Sony has been very outspoken that they're looking for new studios to buy. So there could actually be a bidding war here soon between Xbox, PlayStation, and maybe a couple other publishers that we'll talk about in just a moment. But what's happening here is the Embracer Group's downfall continues on. Basically, earlier this year, the Embracer Group announced that a major $2 billion deal fell through unexpectedly last minute. Apparently, they had a verbal agreement on the table, but it ultimately just didn't work out, and residual effects of that has been rearing its ugly head ever since. They've closed down some studios, including Volition. That was a high-profile studio, the makers behind Saints Row. They've also downsized some of their studios as well. Most recently, the marketing team over at Crystal Dynamics has been impacted. So they're facing some legitimate problems, and they further admitted that today by saying, quote unquote, ultimately, we are making decisions to either restructure or downsize some teams, and there will be a few cases of closures. It's difficult and it takes time, but we announced this in June, and now we're at the end of September, and we're confident to deliver on the targets we set out for the end of the fiscal year. However, and this is the part that's garnering so much attention, reportedly the Embracer Group is now open to the idea of divesting their studios. Now, keep in mind here, they have a ton of studios because they have been on a huge acquisition spree in the last so many years. So there's not really a guarantee that they'd be willing to sell off their AAA developers. But the three that immediately comes to mind here are Crystal Dynamics, the studio behind Tomb Raider, Eidos Montreal, which works on Deus Ex, and then the Metro Studio 4A. I mean, these are huge AAA studios with established IP, and as we know, IP is king. Everybody wants those big, well-known IP, and they are willing to pay a lot of money for them. And if the Embracer Group has any studio that would attract these big buyers, these three immediately comes to mind. Now, if there's a few other, you can let me know in the comments below, but I mean, really, if you think about it, it was always a surprise that the Embracer Group snagged both Eidos Montreal and Crystal Dynamics from Square Enix for $300 million. At the time, a lot of people felt that they were worth a lot more money than that, and I think that if they do put them up for sale, they will make a lot more money than $300 million. In fact, if you look at what's happening right now, you have to imagine that one of the first phone calls that they'd receive is from none other than Team Xbox. Now that that Activision Blizzard acquisition is almost over, finally, let's cross our fingers nothing else happens here, but they're probably going to go on a hunt again for more acquisitions, and Crystal Dynamics is a studio that's closely tied to Xbox. They're already working together on Perfect Dark, and by just flat out acquiring them, that would make a lot of sense for Xbox. Not only would that give them the talent to work on games like Perfect Dark, but it would also give them Tomb Raider, another big franchise for Xbox Game Pass. I think that this is the perfect combination. A lot of people already felt that they missed out when the Embracer Group first acquired Crystal Dynamics, but with this news here, Xbox, I mean, they might get their opportunity after all. Like I said, though, Xbox, I think they make a lot of sense here, but they're probably not the only publisher that's going to have some interest in a studio like Crystal Dynamics. Sony, I'm sure they'll probably call as well. Amazon, that's somebody to keep an eye on with their interest in Tomb Raider. And then there's, of course, big publishers like Tencent. If I'm the Embracer Group, though, I'm not fielding any calls until the Activision Blizzard deal is over. Now, the reason I say that is because if you get Microsoft involved in a bidding war with PlayStation, Amazon, or whoever, I mean, that seems like the perfect recipe for bukus of money. I mean, we'll see what happens with all this, but I mean, one thing is for sure here, some major changes does appear to be inbound for the Embracer Group and their studios going forward. Let's go take a look at the poll of the day, though. We're asked you all, what letter grade would you give the Xbox TGS 2023 showcase? And as you can see here, most of you all were indeed happy with this showcase. 43% being the majority gave it a B, but if you also include the 13% that gave it an A, that's 56% that gave it a great grade. And I do agree with you all on this one. I'm going to go ahead and give this one a B as well. There wasn't really that huge surprise moment of something like Final Fantasy VII Remake for Xbox. I know some people were hoping for that, but they did have some very welcome games there, such as Octopath Traveler 2. That's a great JRPG, and in my opinion, a must-play for fans of the genre. But I think that if you're an Xbox Game Pass subscriber, those are the true winners here. They came loaded with several Game Pass announcements, which includes 2 more Yakuza games. So yeah, I'm going to just go and say I think this was a good, solid showcase, an easy B. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode, but if you liked the video, don't forget to hit the notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.